Hello and welcome to the Explorers Club World Elephant Week's evening. My name is Mark Fowler, and I'm very excited to be here this evening. We started yesterday's World Elephant Week with Elephants 101 to talk about Asian and African elephants. And today we are very excited to dive into the world of protecting elephants and engaging the public. I'm the Vice President of Conservation, Mark Fowler, at the Explorers Club, and I'm coming to you live from Grace Farms Foundation in New Canaan, Connecticut, where I am the Nature Initiative Director. Tonight's a very special evening. We have the most amazing conservationists from around the world that are working to save elephants and to engage the public so that they care and they become engaged in the protection of elephants. My first guest, I have two guests. I have Paula Kahumbu, and I have Brian Christie, who will be speaking this evening. Paula Kahumbu is the CEO of Wildlife Direct, and she is one of the most amazing conservationists I've ever met and spokespeople for elephants and for African wildlife. Paula is the producer of Wildlife Warriors, and she founded the movement called Hands Off Our Elephants. And she engaged the Kenyan public so that they would care and wear armbands to protect elephants, that they were on board with protecting elephants. This has been a groundbreaking campaign, and Wildlife Direct is one of the most organized of all the conservation organizations out there. They are based in Kenya, and they work to protect elephants, and she is one of the top spokespeople around the world. Paula, I know you'll be speaking this evening about how to win hearts and minds of the public. I know that's your what you're working on so heavily. I believe you met our founder and CEO Sharon Prince at the World Economic Forum a few years ago. So I work at Grace Farms Foundation, where Sharon is our founder and CEO. So there's a lot of exciting connections here. We work to protect wildlife and stop and combat wildlife trafficking here at Grace Farms. So speaking with you and Brian Christie tonight is an honor, and I really think we have a lot to talk about. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Paula Kahumbu. Paula, you can make yourself live. Hello, how are you today?
I'm very well, Mark. Thank you so much. This is such a pleasure and so wonderful that you're doing this World Elephant Week. Thank you.
Well, thank you for everything you do. I will pass the mic over to you, and I'll turn off my camera, and I can't wait to hear your incredible work about what's happening out there in Africa right now, in Kenya, for instance, with elephants. So go ahead, and then we'll come on back afterwards, and we'll hear Brian, and then we'll do some Q&A. Does that sound good?
Super.
Right.
Well, first, I just want to say that, my background is I'm a Kenyan. I grew up here in the city of Nairobi, and I didn't see my first elephant until I was late in my teens. I had, like many young Kenyans, my prospects for a career were to work in an office somewhere in, this part of the world where there is such rapid development that the idea of aspiration is to work in the city. But I loved nature. My neighbor was Richard Leakey, and he introduced me to nature when I was 5 years old. And that sent me on this, quest to be like Jane Goodall, out in the field, working with wild animals. It led all the way to my PhD, where I studied elephants. But it wasn't a straightforward journey. But after I had done my PhD in elephants, which I was very fortunate enough to have gone to Princeton University, met people from all over the world, I realized that, this is not just a Kenyan animal that I love and my fellow Kenyans love. This is an animal that is beloved all over the world, the African elephant. The story of Jumbo, this amazing elephant that came from Africa and won hearts and minds, so much that when it came to the ivory trade and the fight to stop the slaughter of elephants, most of the push was coming from North America, Europe, and Australia. So when the massive wave of poaching began as a result of the trade in ivory from 4 Southern African countries to China and Japan in 2008, Kenya saw this wave of poaching that threatened to decimate all of our elephants. And this was after 20 years of effort to protect our elephants after destroying 12 tons of ivory in 1989 to send a message to the world, here we were back at ground zero all over again, seeing the potential total and utter annihilation of our elephants. We decided that we weren't going to wait for anybody anywhere else in the world to solve the problem for us. I had worked for government. I know how difficult it is to shift a government machinery to address an emerging problem in the time frame that's required. Elephants are long-lived, slow-breeding animals, very intelligent, family-oriented. You interfere with their structure, with their trust of humans, and it takes decades for them to recover. So we launched Hands Off for Elephants, a campaign to win hearts and minds of all Kenyans to fight for this magnificent, intelligent animal. This campaign literally took thousands of people onto the streets of Nairobi, chanting justice for our wildlife. And it really did move our government. We didn't just depend on emotion. We went to the courts of Kenya to find out why there was so much crime against our wildlife. And we discovered that it was because there was no deterrent. The laws were weak. The judges didn't see them as serious crimes. Most of the cases were thrown out because of corruption. You could literally cause your file to disappear from a government registry. And so we exposed this and we declared a national disaster. It was audacious. Richard Leakey was my boss. And together, his voice, our science, our data, it led to a reckoning with the Kenyan government that we were actually potentially witnessing the destruction of all our elephants. And as a result, Kenya changed her laws. Today, we have some of the strongest laws in the entire continent, if not the world, to protect our endangered species. We also trained more magistrates. We created special courts to fight wildlife crime, especially the trafficking of ivory and other, valuable products from endangered species. And we launched a massive education campaign. Our elephant poaching went down very rapidly. We're now at about 98% of a decline of poaching since that time in about 2013. But it's not enough. It's really not enough. What we now know is that much of what is happening to elephants is happening to many other species. And so our campaign, Hands Off for Elephants, as successful as it really was an awakening, a realization that we need more than efforts just to save elephants. We need to save other species. And we need to also address some of the other emerging problems. So some of those problems include, for example, human-elephant conflict. As elephant numbers begin to recover, elephants return to where they've been in the past. Elephants try to walk all the way to the city of Nairobi. That's an ancient migratory route. And what it does is it puts people right in the pathway of elephants. And that, of course, can be deadly. And so now my country has to think about, so how do we deal with this problem? Because while I'm trying to win hearts, elephants are destroying those hearts by destroying crops. People have begun to hate elephants. And it's not unique to Kenya. This happens across the continent. The truth is, most Kenyans have never seen an elephant. And those who have seen elephants or have heard elephants, because often they come at night, is quite a terrifying experience. They don't get to see elephants the way that most people in the world see them on television as these beautiful, intelligent creatures. They get to see them as these terrifying giants that are in the way of their prosperity. And so we must address this issue of human-elephant conflict, of poverty in areas where elephants occur. And in addition, we have to look at what do we have to do to address the policy environment that led to a situation in which our elephants are in so much trouble. And I'll just leave you with one of the examples. Down in Amboseli, one of the most iconic landscapes in all of Africa, you've got this backdrop of this magnificent mountain, Kilimanjaro, 2,000 elephants, the most famous elephants in the world. They are coming now head to head with mega farms, industrial scale plantations, in this case, avocados. A farmer has bought land from the local community who are desperate. They don't have cash, but they've got lots of land. They've sold thousands of acres to farmers, and that's right in the pathway of elephants. This kind of development never happened in the past for various reasons, but it's happening now because land ownership is changing, land rights are changing. And that means that historic policy decisions are now playing out and affecting wildlife. Um, it looks bad now. It's going to look much worse in the future. Kenya's population is 55 million, and it's heading probably to about 150 million in the next 100 years. So this problem is going to get worse. We need solutions, and we need solutions now for the future. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Paula, for telling us, what's really happening on the ground right now. I think because of COVID, people checked out of a lot of the international challenges and they worried about just their own their own environment. But it's so important that you've been doing this work and are out there on the front lines every day. It sounds to me like human wildlife conflict, now that you've done such a good job of protecting animals, human wildlife conflict is becoming the largest challenge as far as the habitat, the two habitats merging.
Absolutely. Yeah. Human elephant conflict, it's very, very difficult to deal with. There are some very clever innovations that are emerging, but really the answer is simple. Elephants need land. These animals require not just space, but they need interconnected spaces. Elephants in Mount Kenya have to cross thousands of kilometers to reach their ancient breeding grounds. And if they can't reach their breeding ground, they cause havoc because their nature tells them they need certain minerals or water, or they need to meet the elephants from another area. And so we will probably never fully understand why elephants do what they do, why elephants want to go where they want to go. They're intelligent, their brains are 6 times bigger than ours. We'll never fathom their knowledge and their understanding of landscapes. But what we do know is that they need to move. We know where they need to move. We've been studying them with radio collars, Save the Elephants, the Amboseli Trust for Elephants, the David Sheldrick's Wildlife Trust. So much research has been done on elephants, but we're still just scratching the surface. But if we keep those spaces open, we can secure their future, way into the future.
Well, I'm grateful to hear that positive and optimistic vision for the future. That's something we all need to hear. A lot of us hear the bad news about climate change and all of this every day. We hear, negative messaging. Even though we know the science and the facts are true, we need to give hope when we try to mobilize people. And I appreciate what you're saying. If we can protect the habitat, the elephant habitat, and not encroach further and further into it, we can protect the species. And by the way, we all learned during COVID when we had to shut our doors and live in a little, room to protect ourselves, we lost our own habitat and we lost our own family units. And we've learned how hard that was. So I'm very grateful for the work you're doing, Paula, and that you're such an amazing spokesperson for the natural world. I know you won the National Geographic Award recently, Explorer Award. So congratulations. And speaking of, I know we have our common friend here, Brian Christie, who I'll be introducing now. Brian will give a small talk, and then we can all come back for Q&A if you have some time. I know it's late there in Kenya, but if you have some time, we can all come back and have a dialogue because, the way I met you was through John Hemingway. John is, an amazing fan of yours and just all the work you've been doing. So I feel like I'm speaking to family. So now I'll introduce Brian Christie, everybody. Brian is an amazing explorer, and he is an author of a fiction novel named In the Company of Killers. But I'll tell you, Brian is actually lived all of the novel. He has lived it himself, along with his colleagues like Paula in the field. Brian was the head of investigations, the chief investigator for National Geographic Society's investigation unit. And he is a journalist an investigative journalist who worked with National Geographic and has worked for 20 years in the field and seen the incredible, challenges that exist when you talk about trafficking of wildlife. You also are talking about trafficking of all different, human, wildlife, guns, drugs, illegal mining. You're talking about all these different crimes that converge as an overall organized crime, and they all sort of enable each other. Here at Grace Farms, I work with my colleague Rod Katabi, who's formerly head of Homeland Security Investigations Connecticut, and he is a specialist in organized crime. And when we teamed up, and as an organization, when we teamed up and we started focusing on the fact that wildlife crime, environmental crime, human trafficking, wildlife trafficking, gun trafficking, they are all related. And so I'm very interested to hear about Brian Christie's message, and not only his book, In the Company of Killers, by the way, has been incredibly highly reviewed and highly recommended on Amazon and by my colleagues around the world. So without further ado, I'll introduce Brian Christie, and we'll hear about his book and also his personal experiences. And then we'll all three, Paula, Brian, and I, will get on. We'll do a follow-up discussion and then open the questions up for Q&A. So, Brian Christie, welcome. You're a fellow of the Explorers Club. I'm psyched to see you again, my friend. And please take it from here and tell us about your most recent project, your book, In the Company of Killers.
Sure, Mark. It's great to see you, and it's great to be here. And I'm thrilled to be on stage, as it were, with Paula, who's extraordinary. And the work she's doing in Kenya is a model for all of us. And I'm just thrilled. And she's really been one reason some of my work had the impact that it did, was because Paula picked up that ball when other people didn't see the value and ran with it and did some extraordinary things. So I want to say that right off the bat. And it's what a great week. I mean, we've got the Explorers Club is put together. You've got elephant biology and elephant behavior. We're going to have people talking in more detail about wildlife trafficking and the global warming in the elephant. And we could stop right there. We could talk only about global warming because it is the existential problem of our time, and we've ignored it for too long. And as storytellers, and that's what I want to talk about tonight, figuring out how to tell the story of the climate and do things to fix things. If we don't do that, then we're not taking care of the elephant. We're not taking care of humanity. So I want to, my plug tonight is for global warming to be addressed aggressively by politicians, and all the things that we've done to, as Paula says, in 2013, elephant numbers started to improve, and it's very, very exciting. People can make a difference. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the story I did that covered the problem before 2013 and give some hope, I hope, into what storytelling can do to make a difference. I came to wildlife crime years ago. I pitched National Geographic on doing it, on bringing criminal investigative techniques to the magazine. They'd never really done that before, not in a systematic way. And we went after a wildlife trafficker in Southeast Asia and made a cover story out of it, called it The Kingpin. And that story had a pretty significant impact. Laws got changed in Malaysia. The kingpin, Anson Wong, ended up going to prison. And we were very proud of that result. But Anson's, the animal that Anson was moving was mostly reptiles. And people don't really care about reptiles. And what I wanted to do as a journalist and as a storyteller was find ways to excite people, to get people to engage and make a difference. And whether that's your reader or your viewer on a documentary or a politician, how do we do that? And Will Smith had given an interview, the actor, and he had just been named the most successful actor financially of the year. And they asked him how he did it. And he said, I did it by looking at what the biggest money earning movies are right over the last 10 years. And the answer was science fiction. And so he did Men in Black and Men in Black 2 and a whole series of science fiction type. And I said to myself, okay, he's a storyteller. What animal has the most impact? And I looked at a number of studies, and I looked at my heart. It wasn't very hard to say that's elephants. And there are few species on Earth who can motivate people the way elephants do. Gorillas, tigers, big cats, bears. But there are very few that really can get people motivated, and elephants is certainly one. And I was searching around that elephant area for crime when I got a tip that the Vatican was smuggling ivory. And the details were that elephants were being killed in Kenya and East Africa. The ivory was being smuggled to the Philippines, where it was being carved. And then because the Philippines is 93% Catholic, any shipments going to the Vatican were not opened. Customs officials were not investigating those shipments. And as a result, the Vatican had a pipeline. So based on those couple of sentences, I bought a plane ticket and flew to the Philippines to interview this government official who knew about this. And when I arrived, and the journalists and in the audience will understand this, the guy denied ever having said that. And I stood outside his building, he wouldn't come out of the building. But the person who passed me this tip was somebody I trusted, and I believed in it. And so I started looking around the Philippines for signs of ivory. And it turned out on social media, there was a very active community of ivory collectors, and they were almost all religious. And what they were collecting were religious icons, the Santo Niño, the Holy Child, the Madonna, the Mary and Joseph, all in ivory. And as I was raised Catholic, and I remembered as a kid seeing the crucifix and thinking back, that may have been ivory hanging in my church. I started looking into who the ivory carvers are, and there's a section in Manila of religious shops. And the very prominent shop said ivory carving. And I looked up the owner of that company without going in, and I found out that he had given lectures in New York, and he was very well respected for selling ivory and carving ivory. And then I found that the community on social media really respected a priest who was a famous collector on the island of Cebu. And I looked into the background of that priest, and it turned out that priest had a criminal history. He had been educated at Notre Dame in the United States. He had served in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, where he was accused of molesting 2 altar boys. And that enraged me. And for me, anger is an important motivator as a journalist. You want to tell the story, but you want to make a difference. And I flew to Cebu to meet this priest, and it turned out that after he settled his case and had confessed to what he'd done to the boys, and in fact twisted it and accused the boys of raping him. These were young teenagers, and passing him cocaine. This guy, who came from a prominent family in Cebu, had returned to the island, and rather than be ostracized by the church, he was promoted to Monsignor, and he was given a compound, his own sort of sect, the Society of the Angels of Peace. It was its own branch of the Augustinian Church there. And this compound was, when I went to see him, was him and a couple of other adult males, and then altar boys, young boys. And it became important to me to tell this story. It became very real. The innocence of the elephant was something I wanted to expose the crime that was at 25,000 to 50,000 elephants a year were being killed at the time. But this priest exploiting these children put a face on this problem and made it very real. It is sometimes hard for people in China, we're a major consumer of ivory historically, for people there who see this beautiful carved ivory to understand that it comes from a bloodied elephant in the field. And But this priest put these two things together for me. So Brent Sturton and I, the photographer, extraordinary photographer, put together a 2-year investigation. And we went after, starting with the religious use in the Philippines. We went to Thailand, another major consumer country, and found that one of the major uses of ivory was amulets. And those of you who are familiar with the blood ivory story know Brent's photograph of these, the Thai man with amulets, ivory amulets around his neck. And we saw the use of the power of religion and spirituality in Thailand that was driving the killing of ivory elephants. We went to China and discovered that the major use of the major manifestation, what people were carving, were mythological and religious figures. Guan Yin, the goddess of mercy, was one of the most popular high-end ivory carvings. It is a Madonna-like figure that is so commonly carved historically in ivory that even when she's not rendered in elephant ivory, in wood, say, or even plastic, she still has a curve that reflects, I believe, the curve of the elephant ivory that's so popular. And so we put that story together. And again, it came from a tip, and it came from being an outsider and looking at things. The only person who had done real work on religious use of ivory in the Philippines was Esmond Bradley Martin, who many people on this call will know. And Esmond was an extraordinary researcher, and Esmond was murdered a few years ago in Kenya. And I want to give a tribute to his work, which was instrumental to my understanding of the historical uses of ivory. Brent and I put this story together, and we showed some of the shortcomings in CITES, and we also built up a relationship with Chinese officials so that they shared with me that the 2008 auction that Paula referenced had been fixed, that the two buyers in the auction, the Chinese and the Japanese, were the only two countries authorized, that they had conspired in advance to fix the prices, to under-purchase from the African countries. And then he explained a number of other ways that they manipulated that system. We put all of that in this story, hoping that people would act, that we would fulfill our role as storytellers in the ecosystem and see what happened. And what happened was extraordinary. The immediate reaction was that everyone denied everything. But very shortly after, Hillary Clinton picked up the story and used it to announce the Wildlife Trafficking Task Force, the first cabinet level task force in history. She was Secretary of State at the time, and the Obama administration launched that. We saw ivory destruction ceremonies in the Philippines. The Philippines started it as the first non-elephant country to burn its ivory. And then that fire that they started spread across the world. The United States burned its ivory. And then, the list of countries that have burned ivory is very long, including China. And finally, that story was used as a major lever for people pressuring China to close its ivory market, which they did in 2017. And all of this is to say that story can make a difference, and that it's not just the journalists that tell the story, but it's the people that share the story. It's the people that recognize this story can be valuable and take it to politicians and diplomats who take it to foreign governments and use it as a lever. So I've since moved on to the novel, believing that we've reached a point where we need bigger levers. We need bigger ways to tell the world about its existential problems. And I began the 2012 story, the Blood Ivory story, I put the pedophile story up front because I wanted people to understand the vulnerability of the elephant in human terms. And likewise, I begin my novel, an espionage novel, with an elephant poaching operation, because I want people to understand immediately the stakes of the story that I tell. And it's a story of convergent crime, as Mark says, of crimes that are bigger than elephants but affect elephants. It's the story of Glencore Mining operating in the Congo that is exploiting the country for rare earth metals that you and I have in our cell phones. And to protect those assets, they're hiring mercenaries, some of whom come from the United States, and are a private military that is operating across Africa, involved in extrajudicial violence that I've seen firsthand. And I wanted to bring some of these threads together in a story that I couldn't tell in a single magazine story, but might reach a bigger audience. So I'm thrilled to be able to share this background and just delighted to be on here.
Thank you so much, Brian. Paula, if you can come on as well, it'd be wonderful to just have a discussion. There we go. We have the two friends from their work in Africa. We can all share the moment. What I love about this is the collaboration between both of you over the years. I mean, we highlighted your work with Battle of the Elephants, and I've spoken about Wildlife Direct here at Grace Farms, and Paula, you know, your dedication is incredible, and I'm wondering now where we go from here, because, you know, we work in the wildlife trafficking space, and we work with Paula. We work with the Lusaka Agreement Task Force and Ed Fury over at LATF and their team, who have an amazing mandate. It's just that they haven't necessarily been empowered to really pursue their mandate recently. So we're working very closely with Ed and with LATF, and things are coming together nicely on the, you know, to get LATF expand their mandate and get them back in action out there in the field. But what I see is happening here is we have these insane stories of organized crime and convergent crime, as my friend Rod Katabi says, my partner here at Grace Farm says, where, you know, a good example is Comey in the DRC was trading ivory that they would poach for guns in the Sudan, and then essentially terrorizing everybody in the region. And so this is sort of the level of crime and convergent crime seems to be insane in parts of Africa. And then, Paula, what you're doing is so insanely important, because you're getting the people to care, and you're working on behavior change globally, but also with your own people. You're inspiring them to care and become spokespeople themselves for elephants. So I think I'd love to start with Paula. What would you say you're most proud of as far as right now your way that you reach out to the youth in Kenya, and also how you're creating behavior change to change the dynamic of sort of poaching and trafficking that Brian's talking about, and sort of bringing the people on board so they're protecting their own amazing elephants?
Thanks so much for that, Mark. And Brian, you know, well done. You've done such amazing work. And yes, we did. We rode on the back of Battle for the Elephants as a major way of exploding into this space, because as you can imagine, in Africa, there are many, many organizations doing conservation, and they are very, very powerful marketing engines that are promoting what these organizations are doing. And so for a small African-based organization to be able to get the presence, visibility that it needed required something like Battle for the Elephants. Winning hearts and minds is not something that is very straightforward, but you know, when you put it into the context of where Africa is in the overall context of Africa's development, Kenya has, you know, not even 60 years of independence. That means that for most adults in their 70s, they experienced a colonial rule in the country, and there is still this great sense of nationalism and desire to further the nation building. And so winning hearts and minds over an animal that is an important part of our identity, it's deeply seated in our cultures. That's what we did. We said we want to remind everyone that our totems, our family names, our place location names come from these special animals that the rest of the world adores, and millions of people will come to see them. And we've forgotten how important they are because we're so busy trying to look like Dubai or New York or Hong Kong. So it's really important that we remind everyone that at the end of the day, our unique African identity is important. And also with elephants, the easy thing was that the enemy looks bad. The enemy looks like Coney. The enemy looks like a guy with a gun or a thoughtless, callous person buying ivory in a market somewhere else in the world. Somebody standing over a bleeding, crying elephant with its babies mourning. Showing who the enemy was very, very straightforward. That's not the case for many other species. It's very hard now to fight against farmers because they're saying, but we're helping with food security. Mm-hmm. So when I say, we have to look at the context of Africa, we have to see, so how do we tell our stories in a way that is going to resonate with what people care about, what people have been told for decades? Don't forget, Africa was, and Kenya in particular, was under some form of colonial rule for almost 200 years before we got independence. So we have this legacy to deal with. And in fact, the colonial powers were the biggest ivory traders, much worse than what's happening now, right? So telling those stories and telling it in a way that people can take it on as it's their fight, it's our fight as Africans, was a big challenge. And I would say that winning the political support of the Kenyan government was critical. And then winning the support of the other conservation organizations who were already in the space and very sophisticated, seeing us as this upstart, troublemaking organization. And then realizing that actually there is space for everyone. There is need for everyone to play in this space and to take up their unique positions. And it's taken a long time, but now what I see is a lot of organizations turn to Wildlife Direct and say, hey, there is this challenge you're dealing with. As an international organization, we can't speak out. It doesn't look right. It's not correct for an international organization to challenge Kenya on its policies on these and these things. What do you guys think? Can we work together and help, shift policies, shift the legal frameworks? But of late, the major thing has been our program called Wildlife Warriors. Wildlife Warriors is a television show, as you mentioned earlier. That's a television show that shines a light on African conservation heroes at the front line. Nobody's ever done it before. In fact, we're still the only African film crew working on wildlife documentaries in the entire continent. So that is how behind we are. We're running banks, we're running multi-international organizations, but we're not in the film space doing what Brian did, which was so powerful. And actually it was Battle for the Elephants that taught me just how important it is that we do this. We produce films and we create role models that every child in Africa can resonate with and relate to and want to be like, admire these amazing people on the front line. So that was a big part of it. But instead of just having a show that runs on television, half of Kenyans have seen my show. We combined it with an actual program in schools. So Wildlife Warriors Kids is a program in 100 schools across the nation. Children and teachers receive the shows, watch them, do activities in the classroom, in the school compound, and then we take them to the national parks. So this is actually driving the engine of keeping the parks open because they need revenue as well. But in addition, it's introducing children to science, to love of nature. This program is so exciting and so successful. Every school wants to be involved in it, but we realize it's really the teachers. We need to win the teachers first, because teachers need to be able to, take the snowball and run with it. And so we take teachers and children on expeditions, and basically it's giving them what I got when I was a kid. What got me into conservation, what really, really like tattooed it onto my brain was an expedition to northern Kenya. I went for a month hiking in the northern deserts, climbing mountains and seeing amazing things, and having to fight for my life and survive in the bush with a bunch of other kids. It was an amazing experience of connecting to nature. I grew up not in the city, but I grew up in a safe place. So going off into the wild, thanks to my parents trusting this organization to let me go off and wander about in the bush. I do that now for children. And we take small children from the ages of about 8 up to 14 or so. We take children into the bush, and we do the same with the teachers. And they have to camp. They have to learn about living out in the bush. People see Kenya as this safari nation, a country where people come and go camping and go into the Masai Mara. Right now, the migration is on. Kenyans are terrified of sleeping in a tent. So what we're trying to do is literally create a movement around taking back this space. It's where we came from. It's not that far removed. It's literally a generation, maybe. Our grandparents still, remember the days when they would go and walk about with their parents as part of their coming of age ceremonies. So it's not a big leap. If we leave it too long, then it will become a very foreign idea for people to go out camping. But as of now, I can't tell you how many phone calls I get. People writing to me, inboxing me. They want me to take their children into the wild. And it's a great opportunity. And so on the one hand, fantastic response, great achievements. And I still feel like we're literally at the beginning of something very momentous, not just for Kenya, but for all of Africa.
Wow, that is so exciting. I mean, talk about innovative to really go directly to the people. The fact that your series is the only one that's produced by Africans in Africa, it's about time. I mean, that's so incredible because you've actually gone to the African people. A lot of the behavior change folks work on changing minds in Southeast Asia or China, but you're going to the African people and saying, hey, we have an invested future in this. This is our heritage. These are our elephants. We are part of this. We are part of the natural world. And the fact that you're bringing them out into the bush to actually experience it in the wild. I mean, I can tell you, growing up on the set of Wild Kingdom in Africa with my father, Jim Fowler, who's very close with John Hemingway, and Brian knows, having grown up out there, that is what changed my life. Being in the bush and seeing, having an elephant rip off the front of our tent looking for an orange that we had inside, or a lemon when my dad was making lemon juice. That was the best thing ever that could have happened. When you see a female elephant and a herd of elephants that, and the power of a huge herd of elephants that I know are harder to find today, it's just, you have to share this passion, and you're doing it and sharing it directly with your people and with the African people. And I think that's a revolutionary idea. And I appreciate what Brian was saying as well. You're talking about storytelling. Storytelling is the oldest human tradition that goes back to our roots in Africa. That's where storytelling comes from. And as a species, that's how we passed on knowledge. And so I think this is so exciting and powerful. Brian, would you like to talk as well, about your work with Paula and how you see the current status and what your real message is from the book, and from, how we can collaborate in the future with these type of organizations like Paula's?
Well, I couldn't be more thrilled to hear and excited about what Paula's doing. I mean, and I'll just share you got to throw in your kid. I mean, what motivated me was shows like Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, watching your dad, Marlon Perkins, confronting these wild animals, and I haven't shared this publicly because it feels a little hokey, but I mean, what I tried to do in my first book, The Lizard King, and what I've tried to do as a journalist is I tell crime stories because what brought me into wildlife was not only going out in the woods in near my home in New Jersey. And yes, there are woods in New Jersey. But crime shows like Gentle Ben and Flipper, and they're not crime shows, but they're something's happened, Flipper, Lassie, these shows that involve animals that solve a problem, and we're all in it together. That model, if you pull away all the stuff that I'm trying to throw in my storytelling, it's that kid, 7-year-old, 8-year-old kid, trying to bring back for other people that excitement from story, and with a real belief, and that what Paula is doing is exactly the thing. And even this, so this is the last thing. Conservation in the United States really got off the ground. My years are off, but it was during the bird plumage trade, and bird plumes were part of everyday fashion, and they were shooting out the Everglades. And the precursor to the Audubon Society established a bird count that involved children. And it was because of that children element of identifying birds, this guy Chapman and the others pulled together, that conservation in the United States got off the ground. And so the children are our future, but the children, even as adults trying to tell these stories, the crime stories, were trying to get people to care about wildlife. What you're really reaching for is the child in these people. So whether they're children themselves or adults, I just think it's wonderful.
That's a great point. Paula, speaking of sort of the original challenge, like you said, I mean, it was I know Kenya has struggled. Kenya has been on the forefront of protecting elephants since Richard Leakey, and now you're carrying on that legacy so strongly. And I know that you worked very hard on, speaking of crime and speaking of how to deal with it, you worked very hard on the prosecution side and making sure that the cases were prosecuted. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been tracking wildlife trials in Kenyan courts since 2012. And the data come every 2 years. We produce a report on this, and we train magistrates and prosecutors and judges to help them to understand how important it is. It's, so much progress has been made because of the revelation of the data that's coming from the courts. The judges, initially, they were very unhappy because I started off in the press saying, I was just in court and I saw this happen. And, what kind of a judge would let off a poacher? And the judges didn't like that. It was much too blaming. And they resisted me at first. So then we thought, okay, let's work with them and actually study what's going on and support them. We provided legal assistance to quite a few cases, to government prosecutors. They're not very well funded, and they definitely don't have the kind of protection they need. We're talking about sometimes going after very dangerous people. The one really, the major case we went after was a criminal called Faisal Mohammed. Faisal was eventually arrested, prosecuted, and jailed. And that was the first time a major kingpin in Kenya had ever been taken through that process. He did wriggle out of it. Eventually, he actually appealed. But he did it after he appealed and got out of it. A couple of Kenyan people from the coast were extradited to the United States on charges of drug trafficking. They, in their plea bargain, revealed that they had bribed certain judges in Kenya, including the judge that had released this particular man. So, the backdrop of it all is that we have this problem of corruption and other drivers of this crime. Kenya's relationship and love affair with China means there's this beautiful pipeline moving products to the east. So there are many other macro factors that we have to take into account, and you can't deal with wildlife crime at just one level. And it was really the head of the investigation department in Kenya who told me this. When I started, my brilliant idea was to do a hotline And funnily enough, we're back at that right now, but we wanted to do a hotline because we thought if somebody is moving ivory out of the country, and I made some calls to people and I said, I asked clearers and forwarders, if I wanted to move an illegal product through Kenya, because there's so much corruption, they were very happy to tell me, oh, this is how you do it. You do this, you do this. So I said, but, so I said, look, I'm going to come clean. I'm just trying to find out, how does ivory move through Kenya? They were like, oh, it's kind of obvious. And I said, well, how many people know about it? And they said, well, for every consignment, probably about 50 people. People from the country where it's coming from, your border post, your highways, your airlines, your courts, your police, whatever. Everybody down that pipe knows what is going on in that container. And so I thought, okay, so they're all being paid off along the pipe. So what if we offer a reward that's bigger than whatever their little payoff is? Because we know that most of the cases are cracked because of a tip-off, not because of really good investigations. It's a tip-off that leads to the investigation. So we thought we would do this hotline and offer rewards. And the head of investigations in the Kenya government said to me, it'll never work, because even if you create a hotline, there's nobody at the other end who's going to take action. You've got to build the entire infrastructure. And he said, you need to start at the other end, start at the courts, because if the courts cannot dispense justice, there's no point having all these reports. So that's what we did. It's reached a point now, though, where Kenyans really understand how important it is to play a role in the whole process. That is, the problems are not so big that as an ordinary Kenyan, you can't just speak out about it. Yeah. So that's why we did Wildlife Warriors, right? We're saying everyone has to have courage to speak out. Everyone should be able to take action. Everyone should feel they have this power, this little bit of power. And when you put it all together, it's really monumental, similar to what Brian just said. So with Wildlife Warriors, we're including now doing a new hotline. We're calling it a justice desk, a wildlife justice desk. And I was with the Kenyan Minister for Tourism and Wildlife today, talking about it. And I would say that, a lot of people don't like what I do because it's difficult to see in the press just how badly things can go when we fail to recognize or fail to take action. It's horrible to have that reflected back on you. I know that. But to his credit, he said to me, well, if you're going to do a justice desk, he said, we want to be involved. We think this is a brilliant idea. We think this is going to play a major role. And I said, I want more than a justice desk. We'll do a justice desk. We'll help the government to better manage the concerns of citizens who either don't know what to do, don't know how to make a report, don't know where to make a report. We will help the government also to communicate how important these ecosystems are. A lot of people ask me, well, so what if the elephants go? So damn what? They're causing problems in my farm anyway. So that tourists don't come. I don't care about tourists. They don't mean anything to me. I don't benefit from tourists. 99% of Kenyans, that's what they would say. So we have to rethink, how do we create a value proposition for Africans in Africa about wildlife? It's bigger than, crime is bad and crime leads to more crime, like corruption. It's actually, so what is the real reason why we should protect these vast landscapes for an animal like an elephant? The ecological reasons to me are very obvious, but not to most people. And so I said to the minister, well, we all know that climate change is this existential threat that can undermine all the economic growth that this country is currently enjoying. That threat is because we have degraded ecosystems. And those degraded ecosystems are because we're just not putting in enough protection. We're not being smart about it. We're not putting in enough enforcement. And I said, if you were to value the services and products that we're getting from nature in our national economy, you'll discover that that our national parks are incredibly valuable. And without them, Kenya will suffer from climate change in a way that is going to be so destructive. So I said, so anybody who's threatening our natural spaces, our wilderness, our national parks, our forests, our watersheds, is actually committing an economic crime. And the government needs to see that. The government needs to be able to quantify it's not just an elephant because a tourist came to Kenya to see an elephant, so it's worth X number of dollars. Elephants are playing a role in sustaining resilient ecosystems, and that gives us resilience against the threat of climate change. And it took a while sitting there talking, but now the government has agreed that yes, we're going to do a valuation project. And I said, it's not just to do it and put it in a file somewhere. We need a whole communication campaign around this to educate the public and take advantage of COP26 to really push this. Use all these World Wildlife Days and World Wildlife Weeks to communicate it and win hearts and minds across the nation. And sometimes for government, it sounds like you're just telling us to do too much. And I'm like, I'm not telling you to do too much. I'm saying we're here to help you. There are so many people who now love and care about nature, and they want something to do. They want to be able to take part in something meaningful. Enlist them, create a mechanism, and make it possible for everyone to participate. So that's where we're heading with it now.
That is amazing. That's so powerful. And, it reminds me of my good friend who I'm sure we all know, Robert Monde from Tanzania, who's the head of the National Anti-Poaching Task Force. They were able to convince the country and the courts that this was an economic crime. So anything that's found that is a wildlife product, and now they're starting to focus on the forestry because, like you're saying, it's all parts of nature. I mean, I'm grateful that you brought up the fact that it's not just the wildlife. It's when you cut down a forest, you also are committing not only an economic crime, but once we lose our habitat, climate change, everything starts to just to like dominoes go down and affect everything else. And so I'm excited because you brought up climate change, and so has Brian. We are here at Grace Farms Foundation. I'm actually partnered up with someone I'm sure you know, Paula, who is Mike Korchinski of Wildlife Works.
Yeah.
You want to talk about an exciting solution, which I think we should be doing all over Africa and around the world, is the idea that you can go in and work with empower the local and forest communities to protect the forest lands, and then quantify the carbon that's in that forest, and then work with REDD to monetize it, and then invest it back into the community. It's really exciting work, and I know that you can speak about Wildlife Works. They protect the wildlife by protecting the forest, and they empower the communities so that they're not exploited for all the slave labor conditions and by bad actors. They empower the communities to have sustainable livelihoods. So, can you talk about sort of that model in Kenya?
The Wildlife Works model is fantastic because it takes advantage of the livelihoods that the people are very good at. So by protecting forests, protecting carbon, sequestering carbon, they are able to attract international funding that only works if people don't destroy the forest. And so people get it. They get it. And it took a long time. It took a long time because a lot of people say to me, so you're telling us to do nothing and you're going to give us money. Like, yeah, actually it is. We're not actually telling you just to do nothing. We're actually telling you to become stewards. So now there's, that project has spawned another project nearby in a place called the Chulu Hills, which is earning $10 million a year for the communities not to farm and not to exploit that forest. And some communities by nature, they don't destroy forests, but when you have large human population growth, you have also people emigrating into these places from other parts of the country. The respect for nature for different tribes, it varies. And so taking advantage of the natural behaviors of some of these communities and also creating markets for their products. In Mike Korchinski's case and Wildlife Works, producing a clothing line that's a fashion line, but also there's a lot of traditional products being made, basketry. The people in that area are just spectacular makers of baskets. And there's got to be like a bottomless pit of demand for baskets around the world because everybody wants natural fiber, in their homes. Who wants a plastic dustbin anymore or a plastic container? It's great to have beautiful handcrafted, individually crafted baskets, which are the result of thousands of years of handed on knowledge about manually making the fibers and twisting it and coloring it and making the patterns. So they're very, very beautiful. And that, that I think is a very exciting model. It hasn't replicated as much across Africa as I think it should have. But I do think that this is going to come it's one of probably the biggest hopes for protecting large areas. It's not just carbon, it's also water. That landscape is the only source of water for an entire city, the second largest city in East Africa, that's Mombasa. So you can imagine what would happen if the communities said, well, we can't wait for those payments, we're going to cut down this forest and farm it because they live there. This connectivity between one urban area, which is around Voi, and another urban area down at the coast, it's really important that that watershed is protected so that people down at the coast get water. So that is not just the carbon value. There's water services. Then there's biodiversity. There's pollination services. There are animals that are eating the pests that are going into the farms, which if you are practicing organic farming or if you want to reduce the impact of pesticides, nature is this like, I don't understand why we have to even explain it to people. It's so obvious. Nature looks after itself, breeds, you don't have to feed it, you just have to leave it alone and it takes care of itself. But in addition, when I take teachers out into the wilderness, and we did take teachers out to the Chulu Hills, and we recently took teachers up to a place called Laikipia near Mount Kenya, and we take teachers out, and the teachers are very used to being told stuff, and I always tell them, no, I'm not going to tell you stuff. You're going to close your eyes, you're going to wrap your arms around a tree, and you're going to listen to that tree and feel and tell me what is it, what's the experience. And they're always blown away because we're not asking, it's nothing high tech at all. Connecting to nature is so basic and simple, and it can be done in the school compound. Every school has got trees. And so now these 100 schools that we work with are busy restoring their compounds, planting trees, planting indigenous trees, looking for, what's the habitat for the insects that we need to recreate in our school compounds. And seeing that, one teacher in particular, he sends me videos every week. He takes children on a hike to the top of the hill, and then he tells them to hug the trees, and he sends me these videos. And so seeing our work being replicated by these teachers is just so mind-blowing. Even if all I do is tell 10 people and those 10 people tell 10 people, it's another domino effect, right? So that is how we're going to have a viral effect. But yeah, I think the carbon story is quite a hard one to communicate to a lot of people. But when you make it basic and it's about water is health, sanitation, it's your agriculture, it's your food, it becomes a lot easier. And so we need to move to valuing other services in a financial and economic way that people upstream benefit from the users of things like water downstream.
Thank you. That is so well said. And, I always say we can't see, smell, taste, hear, or feel carbon dioxide, so it's something we can hardly relate to. And I agree with you. I mean, explaining that trees are Mother Nature's original carbon sequestration tool is the easiest I can say it. But you're right. When it comes to why is carbon such a big problem? It's, when you look at it and you bring it down to not only protecting the trees, but protecting the water. That's right. That's beautifully said, Paula. And, Brian, you brought up originally, you said, I'm going to give a big shout out to, climate change. What are your thoughts on how we're talking with Paula? Because, I know that you've worked in the investigative realm, and Paula works in in the behavioral change sort of inspirational realm. But I know that together, that's the two sides of the coin we have to work on. But go ahead, Brian. I know you brought up climate change, and I think that's why, people like Wildlife Works and all of this is so important. But go ahead and let's hear your take on the future. I think Paula's given us a very inspirational, message about the future. I'd like to hear yours. Unfortunately, we've had such a great discussion. It looks like we won't have much Q&A tonight, but I'm just excited to hear your take. And then I want to hear about, where we can support both of your organizations. So go ahead, Brian.
Well, I would take a lesson from the storytelling that we did on elephants and apply it to the climate change situation. The circumstance with elephants seemed impossible in 2010, 2011. I mean, it just seemed overwhelming, and the momentum seemed to be in favor of the Southern African countries wanting to sell their ivory. China and Japan were both saying, we can manage this. And people said, there's nothing you can do. It's happening. And there's no way to stop poaching. And storytelling was one way. And the thing that was exciting to me was introducing crime storytelling into the nature space. And people got very excited about, and it crossed borders. I mean, I was at an event at National Geographic headquarters, and a Republican congressman came in, and he shook my hand, and Gary Nell was the chairman. He shook Gary's hand. He said, you know, I'm really not on your side, but I'm just want to stop by and say hello. And I said, you're not on the side of stopping crime? And he literally stepped back, and I said, and what he thought was we were tree huggers. And, you know, he didn't want to be caught dead with a tree hugger. Paula, apparently they're literally tree huggers out there. But that framing things in terms of crime brought a whole new audience to the problem, and I think made a big difference. What I would recommend, and I wish there were more of, is bringing crime story narratives to climate change.
There you go.
Identifying what we did with Geographic was identify this is the guy. This is the government official that enables that guy. And this is the system. This is where the system is broken. And approach these stories like crime stories and get people. I mean, as you say, carbon is amorphous, and climate change, you couldn't name this problem more poorly than to call it climate. It's like calling it gravity.
Yeah.
Or, you know, gravity. What are we going to do about gravity? We could call it death weather, and people would get the message. Death weather is causing these problems. I don't advocate that, but
I like what you're saying about the book. You know, that's maybe your next book. I hope is investigating and bringing the crime into what really happens in the climate space. I mean, there's a lot of crime and profiteering that leads to all of the major challenges we have in those spaces.
Exactly right. I mean, put the oil company executives who are cutting these deals and corrupting these governments. And this isn't, I mean, Africa gets branded as everybody there's corrupt. Well, they're on a big scale, they're corrupt because these guys sitting in Houston or Washington are enabling that, or they are the kingpins in the climate space. To take an example, I would encourage journalists and storytellers to start looking at who's responsible, and can I frame some of it? You know, it won't solve the problem, but it'll change the dynamic from this woe is me scenario to, hey, that's not right, and I want something done about that guy. And that helps to change things.
That's powerful. So I just want to say, first of all, at Grace Farms, I've worked with both of you, and I look forward to working with you both again, because we're working on the crime side, and also with the protecting of forests and natural resources and empowerment, like you're working on, Paula. I can't wait to come to Kenya and see you, and hopefully meet up with Wildlife Works and really get working on some projects. And Brian, I mean, I love what you're saying about climate change, because we all have to have a message. I want to hear about, you know, I think it's imperative to expose what's really happening and the crime that happens that creates the climate change challenge. But you know, as far getting back to Africa, I what I've heard from both of you is ultimately a hopeful message, and you know, about empowering people and about exposing the crime that's happening. And I'll say to you that we are on board 100% to help promote your messages and your stories. Paula, we will definitely, do we go to Wildlife Direct to see to be able to support your work? And
absolutely.
Okay, wildlifedirect.com. Sorry.
.org.
Okay, and then Brian, show us your book so we can see it, man. I want to support it. It's right behind you.
That's very cheesy. Yeah.
I know it's super cheesy, but I want to see it so we can all buy it. So that's In the Company of Killers. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm so honored to be here today with both of you. Paula, thank you for your inspiring work. Please keep it up. And I can't wait to see you in Kenya. Brian, I'll see you soon. And I thank you so much. We have World Elephant Week is happening through Thursday, and on Thursday is World Elephant Day. So I'm sure many of your colleagues will be there, and we'll be interviewing them as well. So, and tomorrow we've got incredible members of the Explorers Club that are in the field saving elephants. So, thank you so much for all the work you do. I will see you soon. We will protect Mother Nature. We will fight climate change, and we will protect wildlife as well as empowering people. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon. And thanks again, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you
Mark.
very
Really
much.
appreciate it.
Thanks for staying up, Paula. Thanks for staying up
Yes.
late.
You're most welcome. Great seeing you, Brian. Thank
Good to
you.
see you.
Brian, thank you, my friend. Take care, gentlemen, and thank
Good
you,
night.
Paula. Thank you.